So, my friends, when we began the Torah reading, I asked that you read along and find a particular mitzvah that struck you, that spoke to you, that worked for you. What did you come up with? What was your mitzvah? What is the one that you liked? Eleanor? Honor your father and mother. I like that one. That's a good one. That is a good one, and a pivotal one within Jewish tradition. What else? What else struck people? I'm sorry? Oh, yeah, not holding a grudge. That is a very good one as well. Yeah. Oh, being honest. At the end, it talks about being honest in terms of one's weights and one's measures. Okay, other things that struck people. How about from this side of the room? I mean, you're all talk enough during the Torah service. I just kid. Yes. Right, that command to remember exactly who we were, and that we as strangers should therefore have empathy for the stranger, for those people who are on the margins of society. Terrific. Yeah. Being fair in your decisions, absolutely. Wonderful, wonderful thing, and I appreciate your mentioning the second part, because Judaism, and people often say, oh yeah, Judaism is all about being fair, but it is a fairness in the sense that we have to be completely impartial. We might think that justice should favor those who are weak, those who are on the margins, those who are poor, those who are in need. And certainly our tradition says we are obligated to those people. But if justice is to be just, it has to be fair across the board. Across the board. Anyone else have a particular favorite that struck them? Be nice to the aged. Yeah. I increasingly like that one more and more myself. So, generally for this week's Torah portion, Parshat Kedoshim, my favorite commandment is the one, V'yahavta l'recha kamocha, you shall love your neighbors yourself, for this is understood by Jewish tradition as being klal gadol, as to being the major principle that in a sense undergirds all of Torah and all of Judaism in our quest to be holy. However, this past week I've really been struck not by that, which is often my most favored one, but by another commandment that comes up that seemingly is very sweet and very nice, and that many of us would think has no practical application for us in our lives today. And yet I would like to argue that I think it is incredibly, incredibly important mitzvah. It is the one that we find in chapter 19, Lifnei iver, before a blind person, lo titen michshol. Before a blind person you shall not put a michshol, a stumbling block. This commandment struck me this week. Honestly, I actually have no idea why. But as I was studying and I was reading along, this is the one I came back to, and I began studying it a little more in depth and looking at different commentaries on it. And there's 4 ways I would like to suggest that tradition offers up for us to understand this commandment. The first, the most contextual, the simplest, is exactly what it says, which is before someone who is blind, literally, before someone who can't see, do not put something upon which they will stumble and over which they will trip. And it is fairly clear that what the Torah is talking about there is exactly what it means, which is if someone really can't see, you cannot put your leg out in front and trip them. As much fun as you might find that. No, don't do it. However, we can scratch beneath the surface of that contextual meaning, and we understand that the Torah is talking more than just about putting something in front of someone over which they will trip. Because the verse just before it, actually part of that very verse in which it says, you shall not curse, you shall not vilify the deaf. And so here we understand that we have another case of someone who has a physical limitation, and you can't take advantage of it. And when these 2 commandments come together, following as they do, one right after the other, we realize that what the Torah is talking about is not just the limited case of putting something in front of someone to see them fall, but that what the Torah is talking about is that we are forbidden from taking advantage of someone's physical limitation, irrespective of what that limitation is. If it had just left it with the blind, that would be one thing. But by adding in the deaf, the Torah indicates that our view of this has to be more expansive than just a narrow, literal reading. But the rabbis will come along and they'll expand it even further, and they'll say, no, this is not just limited to the literal meaning. of putting something in front of someone. And it's not just a matter of not being able to take advantage of someone's physical limitations. But the rabbis will go on and expand it, and they will say that if you know someone who has a weakness for something, if you know that there is someone who's troubled by something, you are not to put that weakness in their face. You're not to put that which troubles them right in front of them. What might that mean for us? Which is, if you know, for example, that someone has a problem with drinking, do not put alcohol in front of them. That is an equivalent of lifnei iver, before a blind person, putting a stumbling block. And it doesn't necessarily have to be even quite so dramatic, right? If you know, for example, that someone is struggling with their weight and they're on a diet, think about the kinds of foods you put before them. Think about what you offer them. What the Torah is saying here, according to the rabbinic tradition, is that it's not just the narrow reading. It's not just about putting something physically in front of someone over which they will trip, but also putting something in front of someone over which they will stumble beyond just the physical, but even something like drinking, even something like eating. I would extend it a little bit further, and I'd say even what you say in front of someone can be considered a stumbling block. Because you can say something, if you know someone is particularly sensitive or emotionally triggered by an issue, and you go into a conversation and you offer up that trigger, and you get them all riled up for no reason except to get them riled up, that would also be the equivalent of before a blind person putting a stumbling block. However, beyond these three levels, I would like to take it to something that I think affects all of us and affects us on a daily basis. I'd like to talk about how I believe this commandment instructs us on a profound and crucial issue that we all struggle with, that we're all blind to. And in this case, we are the ones who put the stumbling block in front of ourselves. And that stumbling block, in a word, is kvetching, complaining. That, I believe, is a stumbling block for all of us. That is something that we are all blind to and that we continually put right in front of ourselves and we then trip over. Now, you might say to me, but Rabbi, kvetching, complaining, please, this is just in the Jewish DNA. This is like oxygen to Jews. What would we do if we didn't complain, if we didn't kvetch? And here I would say we have done something incredibly unfortunate, which is we've taken a characteristic, a trait that we manifest, and we've elevated it to an idealized and fun form, put it on a pedestal, but in doing so, we simply permit ourselves and justify behavior that is to our detriment. Even the Torah, in one of its overarching themes and narratives throughout the Torah itself, talks about the Israelites and how much they complained. And if you look at the book of Exodus, and you look at the book of Numbers, and you read the book of Deuteronomy, how much do the Israelites kvetch and complain? Constantly. They're out of Egypt 3 days. Where's the water? Right? Even just, I'm actually not doing anything. Still doing that. Let's see if it's my mic. How's this? All righty. If it fritzes again, Cantors, Rabbi Silver, you're on. Okay, so where was I? Right. If you look at the Torah, how much do the Israelites complain? They complain all the time. They kvetch, they carry on. 3 days out, as I mentioned, they're starting to complain about water. And they're complaining about food. A little bit further out, they start complaining about, oh, how good we had it in Egypt. They were slaves. They were beaten. Their children were thrown into the Nile. How good we had it. Right? And how far does their kvetching take them? Does it get them into the Holy Land? No, on the contrary. It is their constant fetching, their constant complaining, that eventually will undermine their confidence in themselves and in God, and will make it so that they cannot enter into the Holy Land. Why on earth we think fetching and complaining is an appropriate part and role model for us as Jews, why we hold it up as an object of humor and thereby, in a sense, permit ourselves to complain, is a mystery that not even God can understand, I suspect. Because I kind of imagine as God kind of looks at us complaining, fetching, he's like, don't they read my Torah? Don't they understand this isn't going to lead them anywhere? And let's ask ourselves, why? Why is complaining so bad? Why is it that it presents a stumbling block for us? It suggests 4 reasons to consider. One is, complaining is all just negative. Right? No one complains, by definition, about something that is upbeat. Oh, that was really terrible. No. When people complain, they're complaining about something that is thoroughly negative in their lives, that they experience as being negative. The other thing about complaining is it's entirely self-centered. Right? When I am complaining about something that happened, to whom did it happen that I'm complaining about? Or complaining for? Myself. So not only is complaining just spewing negativity, but it's also entirely self-centered. And not only that, but in addition to those things, when I complain about something, I paint myself as a victim. I portray myself as someone who is entirely passive about the events that are unfolding within my life. Well, this just happened, and you complain about it, and the person listening could think, well, you could have done X, Y, and Z. You're not simply the victim of it. And yet complaining puts us in this passive victim place. And lastly, complaining is about holding on to the past. Right? Something happens and we complain about it. Okay, and then what do? We complain more. And then what do? Complain more. And again, and again, and again. And all of that is complaining about something that has happened already, about which we can do absolutely nothing. It's already past. And so complaining has us focus on the things about which we can't do anything and have nothing to do with what's coming up. And these 4 qualities are completely antithetical to Jewish tradition and to Judaism's outlook on the world. For all of the terrible things that have befallen us as a people, what is amazing is how positive Jewish tradition is. Jewish tradition calls upon us, as we spoke at the beginning of the service, to look at each day as if the world were being created anew and fresh. We're taught in the Shulchan Aruch, the core law code written in the Middle Ages, which opens with the phrase, you shall approach each day, you shall get up each day like a lion. Our law code begins with an attitudinal statement about the way we are approaching each day, and it's not to be one that is quiet. It's not to be an approach where we are defeated. On the contrary, we approach it like that most powerful of beasts and embrace it fully for what it is. That is the way Judaism looks upon things. We're called upon at the beginning of our service to offer up blessings, to be thankful for the things that we have, all focusing on the positive. Judaism is also not at all self-centered. It is other-oriented. This week's Torah portion, a great example, my favorite commandment, V'yahavta l're'echa kamocha, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. At its very core, Judaism asks us to consider the other, to look upon the other, and to love the other, which is to say, to be of service to them, to help them carry whatever burden it is they are struggling with. And in addition, Judaism is not at all passive. On the contrary, Judaism is a call to be active. The concept of the Brit, the concept of covenant, is one in which we are invited to be partners with God. The Torah begins this notion, and Rabbinic Judaism will take it and expand it. and understand that from the very beginning of creation, humanity is invited to be partners with God in completing the work of creation. This is not a tradition that condones passivity. This is a tradition that invites us to be active in our world, to work with God, to bring that sense of holiness into the world around us. And finally, Judaism is far from a tradition that asks us to hold on to our past. Now, I know this might seem a little bit funny, considering we just had a holiday in which we're called upon to see ourselves as if we were slaves. And you might say to yourself, what could be more holding on to the past than a night in which we reenact our enslavement and see ourselves as slaves? But that's only part of the story. We're to see ourselves as slaves. Okay, it ain't me. We're to see ourselves as slaves so that we have sympathy for and an empathy for the other person. And we're to see ourselves as slaves so that we can experience that most crucial of moments, the moment where we're brought out of Egypt, where we're taught that no matter who you are, it doesn't matter. You can be born rich, you can be born poor, you can be born free, you can be born a slave. Each and every day is filled with the possibilities of something new and different unfolding. We're freed from Pharaoh. We're freed from the constrictions of Mitzrayim, of Egypt, in order to realize that we have the ability to shape some of our world, that we are not passive victims, that we can join and partner with God to create a better world. And in doing so, we can approach our world in a manner that's positive and embracing, and not negative, and one that shuts us off. Really? These are Jewish qualities. To be positive, to look towards the other, to realize that we are not passive but active in shaping our fate, and to understand that anything is possible. That is how our tradition calls upon us to do this. Complaining is the absolute opposite of all of those things. If you want a kind of a humorous image, think of it this way. Complaining is like eating a double bacon cheeseburger with a side of milkshake. That's what it is to complain. Not that I would know how any of that tastes. So here's an image that I want you to keep in your mind as we approach different things. I want you to think about dishes in your sink. Now, you can look at the dishes in your sink and you can say to yourself, "Oy, I can't believe I have to clean these dishes." Or what else can you say? Yeah, I could put them in the dishwasher, yeah. Or you can say, "Aren't I lucky that I was able to feed myself today?" And I want you to think now of a dish filled with, or a sink filled with tons of dishes. And you can be like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I have to clean all of these dishes." Or you can say to yourself, "Am I not lucky that I not only can feed myself, but I am surrounded by others who I can feed and who are part of my life?" And you can look at leftovers that come with all the dishes that you've washed. And you can be like, "I can't believe I have all these leftovers." Or you can understand that you are literally and metaphorically in a position where you can feed and nourish other people. It's all a matter of how you look at it. Of course, you can complain about these things. But as I said, to do so is to really be stepping outside of what Jewish tradition encourages us to do and the way it encourages us to look at our world. Now you might say, can I not complain a little bit? Is there not some value to complaining? Are there not some things over which it's worthy to complain? Sure. We have friends, we have members of our congregation, we all know people who face difficulties within their most significant relationships, who struggle to find work, and who are challenged by illness and other health issues. Might not those be cases in which one can complain? The answer is yes. One can understand complaining under those circumstances. The only problem is that to keep complaining about them does nothing for them. And to let someone who is involved in those circumstances, who is struggling with those things, continue to complain, in a sense, is to enable them to walk down a path of negativity, of victimhood, one that narrows their options and their possibilities and their sense of what their life can be. And so, yes, we understand there is a therapeutic value to complaining, but honestly, if you're going to complain, I would give you 5 minutes and do it to one person and leave it at that. Because much more beyond that, we have to understand that in all likelihood, we're not really helping ourselves at all. We're just continuing down a path that leads to nowhere. And so this is the challenge of the Torah portion. The challenge is for us to see the stumbling block that we place before ourselves and to remove it. It is hard enough to live life sometimes. It is hard enough to be human. We do not have to make it any harder by placing before ourselves that which blocks our own ability to walk paths of holiness. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.